Welcome to the debate. Imagine you are a third-year doctoral student. It is finals week, your thesis defense is looming, and out of nowhere, you are hospitalized with severe clinical burnout.
Oof, a complete nightmare scenario.
Right, and to make it worse, your funding is about to be cut, and your academic advisor, who, let's be honest, has never really liked you, is using your absence to just sideline your research entirely.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is a very real reality for a lot of young professionals right now.
Exactly. And the traditional advice from the spiritual world usually splits into two extreme camps here. One side tells you to, fight the devil, claim your absolute healing, and command your funding to return.
Right, the active approach.
Yes. And then the other side tells you to surrender to God's mysterious will, accept the sickness as a lesson in humility, and basically just let the chips fall where they may. But, and this is what we are digging into today, what if picking just one of those options is exactly what destroys your career and, honestly, your faith?
I mean, it really is the ultimate crucible for young professionals and graduate students. When you hit that wall where your career ambition just violently collides with systemic blockades or personal collapse, the theology you rely on isn't just theory anymore.
No, it's survival.
Exactly. It is a survival mechanism.
Which brings us to the central disagreement we are hashing out today. When facing these crushing academic and career hurdles, should a young believer rely on the active exercise of external spiritual authority or the passive posture of internal absolute surrender? I will be arguing for the Word of Faith framework, which emphasizes external authority, resisting these hurdles as illegitimate attacks, and the active legal appropriation of grace.
And I will be taking the opposing side, arguing for the framework often called the deeper life approach. I assert that true spiritual maturity in these high-stakes environments requires internal surrender, a yielding of our obsessive career ambitions, and the complete cessation of human effort.
Okay, well, let's get right into the mechanics of the Word of Faith perspective, because I think it's highly misunderstood, especially by people in academia, who are so used to, working for every single inch of ground they gain.
That is definitely true of academics, yeah.
Right. In this view, faith is not some passive coping mechanism to make you feel better about failing your defense. It is a spiritual law. It's a tangible mechanism.
A tangible mechanism to do what exactly? Manipulate outcomes?
Not manipulate. Legally appropriate. Think of it like a trust fund. If an unimaginably wealthy benefactor puts $10 million into a bank account with your name on it, that money is legally yours.
Okay.
You did absolutely nothing to earn it, and you cannot work to increase it. That is grace. But, and this is the crucial part, that money will just sit there until you physically walk into the bank, verify your identity, and sign the withdrawal slip.
So faith is the paperwork?
Exactly. That action is faith. Faith doesn't move God. God is already moved. He already funded the account. Faith is just the withdrawal slip. So when a young professional is facing a massive hurdle, say a lack of funding for their research, they shouldn't just passively accept it.
Because they have a right to it.
Yes, they have a legal right to provision. They must actively apply faith through spoken confession, treating the promise as a reality, completely regardless of the negative bank balance they see in the physical world.
Well, I hear the appeal of that. I really do. I mean, especially when you're 25, stressed out of your mind, and desperate for a sense of control over a completely chaotic job market.
It is empowering.
It feels empowering, sure. But I fundamentally reject that approach as the primary operating system for a young believer. The crucible of early adulthood requires something entirely counterintuitive to the ambitious mind, which is absolute rest.
Rest? When your grant is being revoked and your career is literally on the line. I mean, that sounds like a recipe for professional suicide.
It sounds like it. Yeah, but let's look at what is actually happening beneath the surface. In the deeper life framework, faith is not a tool to leverage against your career circumstances. True faith is the profound, devastating realization of your own utter helplessness.
Okay, but how does helplessness pay the tuition bills?
Well, the primary object of faith is not a specific outcome. It is not landing the tenure-track job or getting the fellowship. The object of faith is the sovereign character of Jesus Christ. If you are constantly trying to, sign the withdrawal slip for your career, you are still relying on your own effort.
Just dressed up in spiritual language.
Precisely. You are still gripping the steering wheel, trying to force the car to your desired destination.
But wait, if I take my hands off the steering wheel, I am just sitting in a parked car while all my peers pass me by? How is that spiritually mature?
Because you aren't the one driving. Yielding doesn't mean you're in a parked car, it means you finally move to the passenger seat. Instead of commanding the mountain to move out of your career path, you trust the God who placed the mountain there in the first place. You rest in the quiet confidence that the delay or the denial or the closed door is doing a necessary purifying work in your soul.
I see the nobility in that, I do. But let me push back hard on the practical reality of it. Let's talk about the intersection of character and power.
Okay, let's do it.
If a graduate student adopts your model exclusively, they are going to end up with brokenness. Sure, but absolutely zero power. A theology that teaches young adults to just accept poverty, burnout, and systemic failure as God's purifying work, it creates a passive, almost monastic Christianity.
Monastic isn't necessarily a bad thing.
But it produces people who are too weak and too resigned to actually innovate in their field or challenge corrupt systems in the professional world. They just roll over.
You call it rolling over, I call it surviving the trap of ego. You are advocating for power. But what happens when you hand a 25-year-old highly ambitious graduate student a theology that tells them they have absolute spiritual authority to speak their desires into existence?
They change the world.
No, you get power without brokenness, and that is incredibly dangerous. It leads to arrogance, entitlement, and the misuse of spiritual principles for personal career gain. You basically turn faith into a cosmic vending machine. If I say the right words, God owes me this corporate promotion.
I mean, that is a fundamental misunderstanding of how legal authority works. Exercising your legal rights doesn't bypass character development. It actually requires it. Let me give you a concrete scenario.
Go ahead.
You have a doctoral student applying for a highly competitive fellowship. They have done the work, their research is flawless, but they are facing blatant systemic bias or administrative blockades. Now, if that student takes your advice, takes their hands off the wheel, and says, well, if God wants me to have it, it will just happen, aren't they adopting a defeatist mentality disguised as piety?
I don't see it that way.
But by refusing to actively resist that blockade, they are literally forfeiting the mission they were given.
Only if you assume the fellowship is the ultimate mission. The deeper mission is the student's soul. Let's break down the mechanics of why surrender has to come first. Think of spiritual authority like high-voltage electricity. It is real and it is powerful.
Right.
Now, think of a young, ego-driven professional's character as a cheap, ungrounded wire. What happens if you run 10,000 volts of spiritual authority through a 10-volt wire?
Well, it catches fire.
Exactly, it melts. It destroys the wire. Character is the leak-proof, fireproof container for power. The breaking of the outer man, the ego, the desperate need for academic validation, the obsession with being recognized by peers, that breaking is the grounding process.
So God breaks the vessel to protect it?
Yes, he breaks it so he can safely trust it with his power. If that student doesn't first go through the crucible of surrender, where their identity is completely separated from whether or not they get that fellowship, they aren't ready for the authority. If they get the breakthrough before they have the container, the resulting arrogance will destroy them.
Okay, the high voltage analogy makes sense. I concede that character is the necessary container. But my contention is that if you practice absolute surrender as a lifestyle, you neutralize your ability to ever flip the switch on that electricity.
How do you figure?
Well, if you are always grounded, you never power the machine. This brings up the dual nature of the cross, which I think perfectly illustrates where the deeper life framework falls short if used in isolation.
Elaborate on that.
The deeper life approach focuses almost entirely on the experiential work of the cross. The idea that we guide with Jesus to defeat our rebellious, ambitious flesh. It is highly subjective and frankly painful.
Yes, dying to self usually is.
Right. But the Word of Faith framework zeroes in on the substitutionary legal work of the cross. that Jesus died for us to defeat the curse, sickness, and poverty. These are objective legal realities. If you only focus on the internal, subjective cross of dying to yourself, you become completely blind to the legal rights you are supposed to be enforcing in the external world.
But the internal cross is exactly where early career professionals face their most severe tests. Let's look at another real-world scenario. A young professional is dealing with a profoundly toxic academic advisor.
Oh, we've all been there.
Right. Or maybe a maliciously harsh peer review committee that is personally attacking them. The natural, ambitious instinct, and arguably the word of faith instinct, is to fight back, to take authority over the situation, bind the enemy, and aggressively defend your reputation.
Right, because that advisor is an obstacle to the work they are called to do.
But the deeper life framework says absolutely not. You do not try to exercise spiritual authority over another human being's will. You use the theology of the cross to deal with your own ego and your own offenses.
So you just take it?
You die to your flesh. You forgive the toxic advisor. You submit to the breaking process. You don't command the advisor to change. You let the insult expose the pride in your own heart.
Wait, hold on. If I am constantly yielding to my circumstances to crucify my flesh, at what point do I stop being a human punching bag?
It's not about being a punching bag.
But if a graduate student is being systemically crushed by an environment designed to make them fail, or they are facing severe poverty because of institutional neglect, just submitting to that mistreatment as a cross to bear is fatalistic. There has to be a boundary. If we are called to resist the devil, when do we get to be the lions?
That is exactly the right question. And there is a very clear boundary. We can call it domain allocation. It works like this: lambs in the mirror, lions out the window.
Lambs in the mirror, lions out the window. Okay, unpack that.
When you are dealing with your internal character, your ego, and personal offenses, you look in the mirror and you apply the deeper life framework. You are a lamb. When the advisor insults your intelligence, you submit, you forgive, you die to your pride.
Okay, and the lion?
Sickness, the institutional blockade trying to stop your research. You apply the word of faith framework. You are a lion. You don't take authority over the person insulting you, but you absolutely take authority over the financial drought threatening to end your doctoral program.
I actually love that delineation. It elegantly assigns the experiential, painful cross to the ego and the legal, victorious cross to the mission. Lambs internally, lions externally.
It keeps things in their proper place.
It does. But as clean as that sounds in a studio, let's push this theoretical division into the ultimate friction point, because there is a scenario where you cannot easily separate the internal from the external.
You are talking about an acute personal crisis.
Yes, let's go back to the scenario I opened the show with. The graduate student who wakes up in the hospital with extreme clinical burnout or a severe physical illness during finals week. Their entire academic future is on the line right this second. The mirror and the window have essentially merged into one massive crisis.
And this is where the theology really meets the pavement. You have profound cognitive dissonance here.
Exactly.
Because you cannot simultaneously believe that God sent this illness to teach you a lesson in brokenness and believe that Satan sent this illness to destroy your life and career. Those two realities cannot coexist in the mind of the sufferer. You cannot actively resist what you are passively submitting to. If you try, you will basically tear your own mind apart.
Exactly. So if you choose passivity here, it is dangerous. If they adopt the extreme, deeper life view, they look at the hospital ceiling and say, well, this is God's mysterious will. They effectively give up on their recovery and their academic term. They just accept defeat.
But if they adopt the extreme word of faith view, they run into the trap of legalism. If they command the healing, sign the withdrawal slip, and they aren't instantly healed by day 3, what happens?
Well, they get discouraged.
Worse than that, they blame themselves for not having enough faith. They lie in that hospital bed, spiraling into guilt, thinking they are spiritually defective because their body hasn't recovered. So how do we navigate this immediate, acute crisis without falling into the ditch of passivity or the ditch of condemnation?
I think the only way through is a highly disciplined, sequential approach. You cannot blend them in the exact same moments. You have to sequence them. Step 1 has to be the word of faith protocol. When the crisis hits, passivity is your enemy. You start with faith.
You become the lion immediately.
Yes, you treat the sickness or the extreme burnout as an illegitimate attack. You stand on the legal reality of grace, you exercise your authority, and you pray for total immediate deliverance. You do not assume God is making you sick to teach you a lesson. You resist it with everything you have so you can get back to your thesis. You establish your legal right first.
I agree, that is the right starting point because it honors the substitutionary work of the cross. But the sequence only works if you know when to pivot. What happens on day 4?
The day 4 problem.
Are officially missed, and the student is still staring at the hospital ceiling. The Word of Faith movement traditionally has no good answer for day 4 other than, try harder to believe, which is just works-based religion.
And that is exactly where the sequence has to shift, or the student will just be crushed by guilt.
Right. Step 2 is resting in grace. If the breakthrough does not manifest immediately, you have to completely abandon any self-condemnation. You pivot to the deeper life posture. You transition to resting in God's sovereignty.
How does that sound practically for the student?
The student in that hospital bed has to be able to say, Lord, I believe it is your legal will to heal me, and I have stood on that right. But while I wait in the dark reality of this trial, I am taking my hands off the wheel. I am not going to strive or panic. Use this fire to burn away my impurities. Use this misfinal to break my terrifying reliance on my academic identity.
Wow. That sequential pivot is a profound survival mechanism. Think about what it achieves. It allows the young professional to maintain their faith for deliverance so they don't just passively roll over when attacked, without being destroyed by guilt when that deliverance is delayed.
It really bridges the gap between the legal reality of what Christ accomplished and the experiential reality of living in a broken world.
It does? Well, let me summarize my position in light of where we have landed today. For graduate students and young adults navigating the intense, often toxic pressures of early adulthood, understanding the legal, substitutionary work of the cross is absolutely non-negotiable.
Fair enough?
Without the external authority framework, without knowing how to stand as a lion and legally appropriate the grace provided for your life, you will simply be steamrolled. The systemic hurdles, the poverty, the competitive nature of modern career building will crush you if you believe God wants you to be a doormat. You have to know you possess spiritual authority over the circumstances that threaten your calling.
And to summarize my position, that authority is lethal if it is not grounded in a refined character. The experiential work of the cross, the deeper life mandate to die to the ego and cease human effort, is the only thing that makes power safe. It is the crucible that builds the leak-proof container.
Right.
Without absolute internal surrender, young professionals will just turn their faith into a tool for naked ambition. They will become arrogant when they succeed, attributing it to their great faith, and they will be utterly shattered when they fail. The breaking of the outer man must precede the exercise of authority.
It is incredibly complex. Maintaining this dual nature, knowing exactly when to actively speak the appropriation of grace and when to completely cease human effort, it is not a formula you can just memorize. It requires a profound, hard-won level of spiritual maturity. It is a lifelong tension to go back to our rule of thumb, knowing when you are the lamb looking in the mirror, submitting to the interpersonal friction, and when you are the lion looking out the window, resisting the systemic blockade. It requires deep discernment, but holding both of these frameworks in tension offers students a highly practical, balanced spiritual life.
Yeah, it really does.
It is the only way to avoid both the burnout that comes from spiritual overexertion and the apathy that comes from spiritual passivity.
I couldn't agree more. If you are listening to this and you're currently dealing with a toxic work environment or your academic life is falling apart, this nuanced understanding of how to balance authority and surrender is worth exploring deeply. There is so much more to unpack regarding how these mechanics operate in our daily professional lives.
Absolutely. You cannot navigate these exact pressures in isolation. Finding a community to process the gray areas, the day 4 is in the hospital bed, is vital.
To that end, if you want to dig into these concepts further, ask questions, or connect with other graduate students and young professionals who are navigating these same intense academic and career pressures, we invite you to join the discussion group. You can do that by scanning the WhatsApp QR code provided in the show notes.
We leave the final conclusion up to you. Does the modern academic and corporate landscape demand more authority or more surrender? The tension remains yours to navigate.
Think back to that hospitalized student or that burning blueprint of a career we started with. Perhaps the goal isn't to frantically put the fire out with your own effort or to just stand back and passively watch your hard work burn to ashes. Perhaps the goal is to realize that the fire itself is forging a container strong enough to hold the very authority you will need to rebuild.